and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism.
Hello and welcome to our panel. My name is Renee Reinhardt. I'm the Executive Director of Faculty Fellowship Program in Israel and the Caravan for Democracy Student Leadership Mission to Israel program. With about 850 alumni representing a very diverse and broad cross-section of students and faculty across the United States, I'm actually the luckiest of them all because I get to tour Israel with most of the groups. So that's why I'm so pleased today to be able to do that, joined by my three guests, whom are giving their time today in a private capacity as program alumni. Two of them are faculty fellows, Natalia Wilson, professor at Arizona State University, who was on faculty fellowship in the summer 2018 program, and Ruben Michael Ceballo, who was a professor at University of Arkansas from the winter program, 2018-2019. I'm also pleased to introduce Brian Huang, who was accepted to Caravan for Democracy as a junior at Union College in upstate New York, and he traveled to Israel in 2019. I'm always interested in people's preconceived notions of Israel before they land, so I think I'm going to start off with that. So, Natalia, let me start with you. What did you think?
Well, first of all, hi, Renee. It's so good to be here with you and see you and everybody. In terms of preconceived notions, I think there's two things I think of. One, I really had such a lack of knowledge. So any preconceived notion, I didn't even have the background, not having been to Israel previously. But I think my biggest preconceived notion was that somehow Israel was dangerous. Like you hear about all the security and the level of danger, but I just wasn't sure what that meant. So I think I really started with that in the back of my head as a possibility. And then I went to Israel and realized I felt very safe there, and still remember wonderful places I was where with the breeze blowing and the peace that I felt there. So I think I would call that out as my number one kind of preconceived idea that I had.
It's an interesting word you just used with peace. And funny enough, I used to hand out index cards. I asked participants, just put down a word or a term or something. What do you think about Israel before you even get on the plane? And yes, we used to come up with words like desert, camels, no water, conflict, lack of peace, internal sort of warfare. And what was really interesting, I kept those index cards and was on the last day. I didn't bring them out again, but I asked everyone to do it again. And I can tell you that the words were very different. Words were coexistence, water solution, Israel's startup nation, technological advancements, the diversity of Israel. So is that you experienced?
Sure. So the preconceived notions that I had, I don't know if they were notions, but I thought it would be a wonderland for someone who's interested in history and archaeology. And I also had a little bit of concern about security. But I think like you said, after the fellowship program, if you had to come up with words post-fellowship, I think the first preconceived notion, an archaeological wonderland, historical wonderland, would have stayed the same. In terms of the safety considerations, we did have, a couple of instances where there were some challenges, but overall you feel safe. So I think that preconceived notion was sort of something that could be canceled out after the fellowship.
Thank you for that. I do believe an important element of the programs are to really understand Israel. It's necessary to meet Israelis. Is that what you found? Did Israelis surprise you? Brian, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from the student perspective, a lot of people, again, had those same preconceived notions that the professors before mentioned. And I think getting to meet the Israelis, you really saw the full extent of how many different opinions they are, or whether they're about little things like which food is the best, or whether they're about more serious topics like politics, religion, and things like that. And I think that's really not only what Caravan did best and what JNF did best was really showing us those different opinions, but really getting to see kind of like the firsthand experience. And I know, at least for our trip, we got to talk to a wide variety of people, not only in different geographical locations, maybe from northern Israel and then southern Israel, but more importantly, differences in age. So we spoke to college students, we spoke to people in their 30s and 40s, we spoke to people in their 70s, everywhere in between, and they had a lot of different opinions based on what they had gone through in the past. So the older people obviously had a lot more different experiences with some conflicts that happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and things like that. While the younger people that we had spoken to that had maybe just finished their IDF service a few months ago before we talked to them, they had very different perspectives on the things that we were really interested about. So I think the most important thing for us was getting, again, to speak to those different people and hearing all their different opinions, like you said before.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brian. Very succinct points there.
As students who aren't necessarily Jewish, getting to go on Caravan for Democracy allows us to speak in a way to the nuance of Israel.
What did this trip change for all of you? Like Natalia, what did the trip change for you?
First of all, I just want to pick up for a second on a few things Brian said, and just want to say from my perspective, I could go on and on about the people I met there and how incredibly impressed I was. It really broadened the way that I think about things. After my time there and came back, still very much influences me. And I look back and really view the trip as one of the best professional and personal trips I've ever taken. I was so impressed by the level of intellect and innovation and sort of experiences. And like Brian said, the diversity of people in terms of ages and geography that we met. And so for me, it's something I still carry with me. I went in the summer of 2018. We're now in 2022. But it's really made me, when I read things or hear something, I kind of question it, and want to kind of dig deeper into like what is exactly, happening. I have to say we kind of mistrust our press in general now about everything. Sorry to diverge a little bit, but right after that really was something that changed for me. Is to question that, because I had gained some knowledge and met a lot of people and then came back and wanted to continue building on that knowledge in a correct way, not a biased way.
In terms of these experiences, and Ruben, I'm focusing on you now, that, part of those experiences for you were also personal. So by all means, happy for you to answer this question. If you can, share with us something that did sort of have a personal effect on you.
Yeah, so I was super excited when I was selected for the faculty fellowship program. I have sort of a racially diverse background. So my mother's white, Caucasian, and then my father's side of the family, we're Tepehuano and Dami, so we're native. But on that native side, there's a little bit of mixing that went on. So apparently we have ancestors that were Sephardic Jews from Spain who came over in the late 1700s and who mixed in with the population it's now called Mexico, of course, but at that time it was New Spain. And so over the generations, we've always had this history, this family history of basically being conversos, right? So people who were originally Spanish Jews who came over, converted to Catholicism. And of course, I was raised as a Catholic, but you always had this, desire to understand your roots. And so for me, to be able to go to Israel was something really special and something really personal.
Thank you, Ruben.
And I just wanted to, I always felt that we were missing something in our family. And I wanted to be able to pass that on to my kids. And so this faculty fellowship experience was super personal and super wonderful for me.
It seems that the trip to Israel seems to really do have some kind of spiritual or some kind of effect that's, for some people, it's life transforming. So I do really thank you for sharing it, Ruben.
Yeah, and I apologize for getting emotional about it, but it's really important. It was really an important experience.
Thank you. No, thanks very much. It really does touches my heart, and I'm sure it touches everyone else. But also, Brian, funny enough, I'm looking at you, because how did your trip to Israel and caravan influence you?
Yeah, so I grew up as an evangelical Christian. I went to church throughout my entire childhood, grew up in Sunday school, and continued that as I grew up. And for me, I was actually telling my friend a few days ago, I remember going to church, and in front of my church library, there was this poster of Israel, and it had pictures of all the important religious sites and things like that on this poster. And I remember growing up, when you read the Bible and things like that, Israel seems like some faraway land, especially when you're a lot younger and you don't understand geography. It seems like some faraway land that has religious meaning, but you don't really expect it to be real in that sense. And when I grew up and when I was in college and I got the opportunity to apply for Caravan, this was something that I was really interested in, because I really wanted to see the sites that I had kind of grown up reading about and hearing about throughout my entire time going to church. And so getting that opportunity, and one of the professors spoke about it a little bit before, it's hard to really put into words that feeling you get when you come to Israel, especially if you do have a personal connection to it beforehand. And I immediately felt that. Going to some religious sites, there's just that spiritual feeling that you can't really put into words, but that you feel it when you enter these places. And so I definitely felt that. And that's something not only that was memorable at the time, but even 2 years later, that's something I still feel and I still think about quite often, actually. And Caravan definitely had a huge positive impact on me. So now, 2 years later, I graduated from school in June of 2021. And since then, I've been getting my master's degree here in Israel at IDC Herzliya. I study counterterrorism and homeland security here. And I definitely would not have taken such a big step of moving to a foreign country if it hadn't been for JNF, hadn't been for Caravan and things like that.
Brian, I'm wondering if that was something that also with Caravan, with your particular bus, was that something that interested you all, that the sort of what you might have heard or thought of as Israel was actually completely different from its actual size, being sort of the size of New Jersey?
Yeah, we definitely heard that. We definitely heard that New Jersey comparison a lot. And I think especially for the people who didn't live on the East Coast, who hadn't really been around that many Jewish people, either when they were growing up or even when they went to college, if they went to college in a part of the US that just didn't have such a big Jewish population. I think that really, really surprised them, in large part due to the stories that you hear about, again, and then I know we touched a little bit upon it before, but the stories you hear about in the American press and things like that, it seems like a much bigger country where a lot more things are happening. And it's a little crazy, and it was a little crazy for people to wrap their heads around that this place is pretty small, especially relative to not even the US, obviously. Most countries are small compared to the US, but even just comparable to any of its neighboring countries and comparable to places in Europe, etc. Just the really small size and how much is happening in there, not only on the religious front, political front, but also, like you mentioned before, the startup nation and things like that.
There's no better gift to give or receive than one that can connect you with nature and your homeland. JNF has made it super easy for you to order your tree certificate online. Just go to jnf.org/trees, pick which special occasion it's for, order your tree online, and let's get planting. Every tree counts.
since you've all been to Israel, how do you think about what you do see in the media? Are you able to sort of be more, I don't know what the word is, constructive, diligent, read between the lines, if you will?
First of all, it's caught my radar, right? I mean, I just don't blindly read stories. I'm like, okay, what is the source of this story? What is this? And so really to become more diligent, it's really forced me to be more diligent in the knowledge that I obtain. Because I think that that's a problem. Obviously, getting sort of biased portrayals of things, and you can't replicate going, as my esteemed panelists have said already, going somewhere and feeling that and learning that. Well, then you bring that back when you're no longer there. That kind of sense of diligence in this arena.
No, thank you. And I think, that's always been one of the objectives of the program, that we want, or, that we promote the fact that we craft the experience for you, that personal experience that each person has and takes and brings back. But then it's up to you to share that experience with the people around you. And again, for each of you, students, the faculty, your families, your community, I think that personal experience, does it have an impact on others in conversation, dialogue? What do you think, Ruben? Is that sort of factual or?
Yeah, I think it does. One of the things that was interesting for me is that at our university, we have invited speakers, and we had at least one seminar that I went to with an outside speaker who was very anti-Israel. And it was quite shocking to me to see the different perspectives of what we're being told at American universities with some of these guest speakers, and then what the reality is on the ground. Of course, both sides, they have their agenda, and they're going to try to put their best foot forward and try to garner support for their side of the argument. But you get a much more level understanding of what the reality is when you're actually there. And so I really appreciated being able to see both the good and the bad.
Yeah, no, I think, again, my goal for the program is that it supports, again, through your experience. It does, by listening to the speakers, and I think Brian on Caravan as well as Faculty Fellowship, there's a wealth of speakers who present views, from across the spectrum, and as much as we can represent the diversity of Israel. The fact that you've heard them and been to Israel, and obviously now you pick up on things when they're reported in the media. Do you think that your own experience supports the dialogue and conversation wherever you are, whether it be at a dinner party with your family, whether it be talking with students or faculty or anybody in the community about Israel? Does it give you that, how do I say that element of, oh, you've been to Israel, so yes, I can engage with you on a different level than if I was just talking about things without having had that experience? Brian, what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely do think that is the case. I think you kind of come back with some ownership of being able to say, I was there, this is what I saw. Especially because vast majority of Americans will not get that opportunity to come to Israel, or just hopefully they will in the future, but in the present time they haven't. And so you're able to say, hey, look, I was there, this is what I saw. You can say that the other person you're talking to can say, well, I've seen XYZ in the media. And you can say, well, I've seen XYZ with my own eyes. And so I think everyone who did Caravan came back with a different perspective, right? Not everyone was fully convinced, or maybe people took back a varying level or varying degree of having their mind changed and things like that, both in a positive and negative way. But regardless, you get that firsthand experience, and you get kind of that authority of being able to say, yes, this is what I exactly saw. And especially being able to fight back some notions that you might hear. It's definitely really powerful to say, this is what I saw when I was actually there.
Right. No, thank you. That's a very strong point. I always see funny enough, during the trips itself, particularly on the bus, I see it as a microcosm of that kind of external world, because you'll place together with perhaps 30, 40 people who, because it's multidisciplinary, or in your case, Brian, it's students from all over, but you already have different views and representations, and again, as we talked about right at the beginning, preconceived views. Did that element enhance your experience?
I think that very much augmented the experience. So, we were exposed to so many different people and places and views and experiences. So I think it very much augmented that we could talk to others. I also think, just to build a little bit on what Brian was saying, is that it forced me, I can't speak for everybody, to think more deeply about issues, to really kind of put things in a broader context, to have that we were there and we heard this, and then to build on that. And that's something that's very much happened to me. I feel we're unfortunately living in a society where people get stuck in little sound bites and they're not really pushed to think deeply about issues and to understand history. And in kind of a personal note, I had an academic father, he's no longer with us, but was just incredible to go back with history. And until you really understand what happened and why we're here and think through that deeply and to speak up about that, I just don't think we're really doing right by many of these issues. And so that's another thing that very much started to get developed, and has been further developed as I came back after the trip.
Are you looking for that perfect gift? The one thing you know that they won't have? Now you can honor someone you love and participate in the sacred act of writing a Torah. You can go online and choose a letter, word, verse, or more in a Torah being written right here in Israel on top of Masada. A beautiful certificate will be sent, signifying the link to our ancient past, and be something that they can keep forever. It's the ideal gift for birth, bar and bat mitzvahs, birthdays, engagements, weddings, anniversaries, and other milestones in life.
You want to talk about the diversity a little bit. One of the
Yes.
things, yeah. So let's talk about that just for a second. So, as you know, Renee, I spent, my academic life working with individuals from historically underrepresented groups in the U.S. and trying to give them access to higher education. And one of the things that was just fascinating to me, and we're actually acting on that post-fellowship, right, with Tel Hai and hopefully Ben Gurion, is the diversity within the Israeli society. So we had Arab Christians, right? And we had Muslims, and we had Ethiopian descendants that were all Israelis. And so there's a diversity in Israel that I think a lot of people don't recognize or realize. And what's fascinating to me is that it's a true democracy. People can have their opinions, and people argue, and they have differences of opinions on politics and things like this, but it works, at least from what I saw, it seems to work very well within the Israeli communities. And so I was very impressed by that, especially when we went into the South and we were able to hear from some of the Ethiopian Israelis of Ethiopian descent. I thought that was fascinating.
And you know what? And let's just carry on that theme, that thread for another minute. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and I talked about it a little bit before, about kind of the diversity in age group and things like that, but also, like the diversity in the speakers that we spoke to. So whether it was former members of the Knesset, whether it was former IDF generals, former journalists or current journalists, things like that. The diversity of opinion, I think, is the most important thing. No matter where you go in life, just being able to hear a diversity of opinion is the most important thing. So you can hear both sides and then form your own opinion based on what you've heard from those both respective sides. And I think, and I mentioned it before too, but people came away with a varying degree of different feelings from the overall trip. While obviously they were overwhelmingly positive, people being able to speak with all those different types of people, and for us students to be able to ask them a ton of different questions, especially people coming from all different walks of life, different professions and things like that. That was the most important thing, was being able to speak to them and be able to formulate our own opinions based on the diversity of people we spoke to. Favorite food? Easy. So if you go on Allenby in downtown Tel Aviv and you go to the Carmel Shuk, we went to the best falafel I've ever had in my entire life. 15 shekels, you can't beat it. I still go back to this day. Absolutely phenomenal. Has only gotten better with time. So,
as I said, we could argue on that point whether it's the best falafel. But Natalia, just about what's your favorite food. But you know what, even before you answer that, just, I do just want to go back to about dialogue and conversation. I think that's so important, especially on campus today, to ensure that there is dialogue and conversation. I hope, and perhaps the three of you can sort of validate that for me, that the programs do answer that, or the objective is sort of we're on the correct trajectory about that's what the programs convey, that by giving you the experience, crafting the experience, that you can go back and ensure that dialogue and conversation will always remain on campus, and so that voices aren't silenced, and that people do not need to feel concerned about expressing their views or expressing their beliefs.
I would say yes, absolutely. I think the opportunity, particularly during teaching, where you're able to bring up, another model. I happen to be in healthcare and focus on population health. So I had, just to digress a second, when I was, in Israel, I met a lot of folks that are teaching in medical schools, working in public health, doing really good research. That in some ways kind of paralleled some of the research I saw in some of our kind of underserved communities, honestly. But I think the opportunity to really bring that up in the classroom and talk about some of those models and work that's being done, I personally, I think that has a tremendous value. And also just to quickly tap into what was discussed a little earlier about the diversity of people and cultures that are coming together, which also really surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. That just merged really well in the Israeli society. I think also the ability to bring that up is powerful.
Right. No, thank you very much. And I think we've seen that Ruben has been working. I hope it's okay, Ruben, for me to share. You did mention about Tel Hai College, and that's another aspect, particularly faculty fellowship. With Brian back in Israel, but one of the great things about also faculty fellowship program is for the chance for the academics to work with the Israeli colleagues. And Ruben, if I can say, that's working very closely at the moment with Tel Hai Academic College to on just such one of those programs, which is great. We have many of those going across the board. And as Natalia said, she also had the opportunity to meet with her Israeli colleagues, and they can continue with their relationship. So on that very positive note, I guess I'm going to say thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Natalia. Yeah.
I have to talk about food for just a few seconds. And what I was going to say is, don't even ask me to pick one, because I absolutely loved everything. And I am a big veggie person. So I still can picture all those veggies laid out at various places and how wonderful. And I want to say that just last month, I bought this beautiful big Israeli cookbook because I like to cook. And so I'm not only reading, because there's a lot about the culture and the food and history, but then I'm starting to make various dishes. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Well, thank you, because I was going to say that we're all physically sort of distanced, but you know what? We'll all be at your place tomorrow night. So you'll be making falafel, sabir, and kebabs and pita bread fresh for us. So that's great. Look, that's quite an important point to end this panel on about the food. But everything else we've said, I think has been absolutely great and really important. Look, thank you so much, Natalia, Ruben, and Brian, just for being with me today and for sharing. For me, it's like a wonderful reunion. I do hope we can do this all together in Israel. Well, in actual fact, Brian, I can say we have done it in Israel. So I just want to say thank you again for your time and for your thoughts, and thank you to everyone who's viewing this.
Oh, thank you, Renee.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
To watch this and all of our past episodes, go to ZTV, our Zionism Studios YouTube page, and subscribe to get notifications.